I will now invite Mr. Barbullushi. I hope that I pronounced correctly. It's one of the experts on green agenda for the Western Balkans from the Regional Cooperation Council, and especially with the expertise in two pillars dedicated to depollution and pillar dedicated to protection of nature and biodiversity. Mr. Marv, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Before starting this presentation, I would like to first express my gratitude to the University of Belgrade and the Faculty of Geography for organizing this conference on the green agenda for the Western Balkans. An agenda which we work daily, however, which, as was mentioned by Ms. Tokic, there is still a lack of public awareness of it, especially in terms of the citizens of the region. So in this regard, I thank you again for organizing this conference, and I really look forward to the discussions that we will have in the coming 3 days. So my presentation will focus more on the policy documents at the regional level when concerning the green agenda. I will start a bit with a background on how we arrived today, what is the current status of the green agenda today, and then continue with a progress overview following the roadmaps which are listed in the action plan for the green agenda. So, as you might know, the Regional Cooperation Council is responsible for the monitoring and reporting of the implementation of the green agenda, and I hope that through my presentation you can also see how we are conducting this exercise. And finally, I will conclude with some observation that we as an organization made in terms of the first year of implementation. So, coming at the background, as was mentioned in the beginning, we have the Sofia Declaration on the Green Agenda endorsed by all the leaders of the Western Balkans in November 2020. If you remember the year of COVID-19 pandemic, and also it was the time period when the region needed a new economic growth model, a growth model based on sustainable development, green transition principles, and especially reaching the climate neutrality, carbon neutrality target for the European continent. So in this regard, the Sofia Declaration was endorsed by all the leaders, and importantly for the Regional Cooperation Council, we had the Regional Cooperation Council was tasked to develop the action plan for the implementation of the green agenda. And it did so duly by engaging in a wide consultation process with all relevant stakeholders, with the regional partners, with the civil society organizations, with the public authorities from the region, and of course the European Commission DG services. So in the end, in October 21, during the EU Western Balkan Summit in Brdo, the action plan document, we were glad that it was adopted, and it now serves as our guiding working document until the year 2030. COVID-19 seems quite far now, considering the war in Ukraine, the start and the continuation of the war in Ukraine, but also, of course, the last year's energy and commodity price hikes, especially the high inflation rates observed throughout the region. So there was always this debate how relevant green agenda is now. However, last year we had the first EU Western Balkan Summit organized in the Western Balkan regions, and in the Tirana Declaration of November last year, it was explicitly stated that the green agenda remains the model for the Western Balkans, especially in terms of building up its resilience towards also outside threats coming from outside the region. So in this regard, I mentioned many times the European Union, and it makes sense considering that the green agenda for the Western Balkans is based on the European Green Deal. It's inspired by it. And of course, it is an important document that guides the strategic partnership between the EU and Western Balkans, take into consideration the region's perspective to accede to the European Union. So two important developments we had last year. So the Bosnia and Herzegovina finally received the candidate status, being now an EU candidate member. And also Albania and North Macedonia finally opened the accession negotiations. We see that as a very positive, including for the implementation of agendas such as Green Agenda, but also the other agenda that we have, the Common Regional Market. Of course, talking about Sofia Declaration, action plans, laws, bylaws, and we saw also the strategies at the economy level. In the end, you need financial resources to back this up and human resources. So in this regard, the economic and investment plan mentioned as well was key. And I would like to add as well, last year, as was declared in the Tirana Declaration, the energy support package. So the European Union providing 500 million euros of assistance, direct assistance to the economies of the region to alleviate the effects of the energy crisis. In addition, 500 extra million are also are going to be dispersed to increase the share of renewable energy sources in the energy mixes of both the economies and overall of the region. So in general, to make the energy more secure, energy secure for the future. Still, there are many challenges, and I will go a bit more. For example, the expected EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, and of course the need that we have to maintain and accelerate, of course, the green transition and the EU accession of our region. So now, considering the time limit, I have to go roadmap by roadmap, but I will try to be very brief. And I would just like to underline that the Regional Cooperation Council is responsible to monitor implementation of the Green Agenda, but also report on this. And the main document that we use is an annual report of implementation, which we are at the final stages of publication, and we expect to have it published at least by the end of this summer. So these are taken from that report, but of course, for more questions, I'm available to answer. So starting with the climate action roadmap, the first roadmap in the action plan, I will start with the main indicator, the greenhouse gas emissions. We took 2016 as a baseline year because we wanted to compare what was the situation before Sofia Declaration and see what was the effect of the Green Agenda after the endorsement of the Sofia Declaration. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, Serbia has the highest greenhouse gas emissions, and it makes sense considering that it has the biggest size of economy, but also population in the region. While Albania has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions in terms of power generation, considering that it is basically completely reliant on renewable energy sources, specifically hydropower. In addition, there is also a consistent increase that the region is undergoing in terms of implementing the EU climate-related acquis. However, this progress is uneven, considering that also the economies in the region are in different stages of the EU accession process. And then, as I mentioned before, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the regulation was adopted this year, and it's expected to enter into force by 2026. And it will have a huge impact on the Western Balkans region, considering that the EU is the main trading partner. Moreover, the goods that the Western Balkan exports to the EU single market are coming from carbon-intensive sectors, such as electricity, cement, steel, and textile industries, all covered under the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So in this regard, the introduction of carbon pricing instruments, carbon taxation type of fiscal measures is crucial. And the region is now in discussions of how to properly engage with this, especially in terms of associating with the emissions trading scheme. But these discussions are ongoing under the Energy Community Secretariat, headquartered in Vienna. Going to the energy roadmap and speaking about the Energy Community Secretariat, we have a series of indicators relevant to this roadmap, but we take all the data, we take them from our partner, the Energy Community Secretariat, because we need, we cannot duplicate, we are trying to avoid duplication, and of course we try to reflect all this data adequately in our report of implementation. I would just like to underline one key achievement for this roadmap, which was, I'm glad that it was mentioned a bit before, namely the agreement on energy and climate targets for 2030. So now we have for the first time economy-specific targets regarding greenhouse gas emissions. This will help, of course, the public administrations in their work, but also Regional Cooperation Council in its monitoring and reporting of progress. The Sustainable Transport Roadmap, I saw it, perhaps I'm wrong, but it was not reflected so much in this scientific conference, but it's another very important area. and namely our regional partner, the Transport Community Secretariat, which is headquartered here in Belgrade, is responsible. The main indicators for this roadmap are basically policy action documents at the regional level, which are related to the transport sector. And of course, they have also very important, I think, the revision of the 10T regulation, which needs to be in line with the European Green Deal and the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. So in this regard, we do the same thing. We take their data based on the methodology that they use to collect these data, and we try to reflect them adequately in our report of implementation. And then, of course, a circular economy roadmap, a roadmap which is very dear to us, considering that we are the main regional coordinator in terms of reporting and monitoring and reporting on its implementation. And we based our monitoring exercise on the 4 indicators which are listed in the action plan, namely domestic material consumption per capita, resource productivity, waste generation, and the adoption of circular economy related policy documents. And it was quite a challenging exercise, considering that all the economies in the region use different methodologies for gathering the data, which sometimes creates discrepancies. In addition, what was quite interesting is that for one economy, for example, the data were different because when comparing the statistical agency from that economy with Eurostat, the European Statistical Agency, only due to the changes of methodologies. So this is something that we need to keep into account, especially for the second year of implementation. Last thing, which is again very important, we have a action which is a priority for us, namely the development of a regional joint statement on preventing plastic pollution and marine litter, a very important topic for economies with access to the Mediterranean Sea. We are in the final stages of developing this document, and we expect actually to have it as a green agenda deliverable for the next Berlin Process Summit event, which is scheduled to be organized in Tirana in October this year. So once we have the endorsement of this regional joint statement, we do not intend it to be some bureaucratic document with no value, but we want it to have a tangible benefit to the citizens, so we will follow up with an action plan to implement it accordingly. Going to the pollution roadmap, I think this is the most important roadmap, considering that in the Balkan Barometer surveys that we do annually, this is the main issue for citizens in the region. So pollution of air and water. Of course, considering the situation of especially air pollution that we have in the region and the reports that we have read, it would make sense to us who are working on the green agenda. And this was also reconfirmed when monitoring when doing our monitoring exercise based on the indicators of air pollution. So namely the particulate matter concentrations, which most economies in the region are surpassing the EU and World Health Organization standards. And this is having very negative effects both to the environment of the region, but also to the public health of the citizens. Other parameters used for measuring air pollution are sulfur dioxide emissions, nitrogen oxides most relevant to air pollution, ammonia, and non-methane volatile organic compounds. And then we have water pollution, which we try to measure through indicators such as connectivity of public water supply connectivity, connections to wastewater treatment plants. So I was really glad to hear about the projects here in Serbia on this. And of course, the nitrate levels in groundwater. So basically all these parameters and indicators are based on the EU acquis, which all economies in the region need to implement, we need to adopt and implement. Then of course we have a series of international conventions on pollution, which they need to as well, implementation needs to progress in this regard, and of course soil pollution. But this specific action is dealt by the Standing Working Group on Regional Rural Development, which will be an important partner considering the following roadmap. So speaking about agriculture, we have also the Sustainable Agricultural Roadmap. We all know that agriculture is one of the sectors with the most number of employees in the region, but also with a significant contribution in the economy of the region. However, it's also a sector which is in dire need of technological update, and especially it needs to, in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation measures. So in this regard, the Standing Working Group on Regional Rural Development coordinates the implementation of progress for this roadmap, and they also provide us all the data which we reflect in our annual report. And last but not least, we have protection of nature and biodiversity roadmap. We have a series of indicators as well, which are listed in the action plan. I would just like to underline the key priority for both the Regional Cooperation Council and the International Union for Conservation of Nature is to actually develop and endorse a regional biodiversity strategy for the Western Balkan, which should be aligned with that of the EU and should reflect all the indicators listed. So these were all the roadmaps. Now I'll just try to conclude what we observed during our first year of monitoring implementation. We saw that there was an uneven progress across the region due to the varying EU accession stages of the economies. In addition, green transition priorities are not the same. Considering, for example, Albania, being reliant on hydropower, does not see, for example, decarbonization as with such priority as other economies. So we have to take this into account when talking about the implementation of the green agenda at the regional level. Of course, there are also external circumstances which really affect what is a priority. For example, the war in Ukraine made energy roadmap a priority roadmap for implementation. And as was seen by the EU response and also by the response of the economies. And of course, there is a need for enhanced regional cooperation and synchronized efforts in green and digital transitions, and to strengthen coordination in terms of implementation of the green agenda, and of course, to improve the monitoring and reporting systems that we have in place. I would just like to briefly note that 2 months ago in Belgrade, we organized the NGO forum, where we tried to gain the perspective of the civil societies in terms of the green agenda, in order to gain their inputs, but also to share information with them. Similar as is done in the economy level, as I saw, for example, the example of Serbia. But then we are planning also for the end of this year to have a local self-government summit in order to have the perspective of local authorities, which, based on the competences that they have, are actually quite important actors for this agenda. And last but not least, raising public awareness. So I really thank you again for this scientific conference. And as I said, I look forward to any comments, questions, and of course to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pretty much sure that Green Force project will contribute strongly to regional cooperation, since we established a lot of connections already, and we can say that very soon we will come with the first results of our research. So we will be happy to share them with you.
Look forward to it.